If you're choosing to interweave timelines of existing characters, past and present, you are going to inherently make a compromise between plot suspense and character exposition. You are inherently going to reveal some plot determinations ahead of time and make the questions become more character questions. I think that's just built into it.
Holy shit, we should cut that and put that at the beginning of the episode so the audience will color. Thesis. That's the thesis, and it's the opening, and then they'll color all their other readings of it, and then it's really meta.
Awesome.
This episode is being brought to you by ScriptUp, which are expert story and script consultants. They're listeners of the show, and they reached out to us and demonstrated.
Being fans helped their cause, but what got them across the line is the fact that they offered us use of their services, and you and I just finished a script that we needed independent feedback from. We got an amazing detailed report from them, but for me, what most sort of coverage and competition and feedback services lack is that actual back and forth and to and fro on stories. And ScriptUp builds into their feedback an actual Zoom call, which was fantastic.
So if you're looking for an experienced, independent insight into how your story is working or not working, consider using ScriptUp.
Yeah. And they don't do any of that promise of access bullshit, like if you pay us X number of thousands of dollars, there's a chance that we may just circulate your script to blah, blah, blah. So they're just about making your story work.
And if you tell them that Draft Zero sent you by using the promo code DZ10, as in the letters D, Z, and then the number 10, you'll get 10% off. So, look, just see the link in the show notes with the promo code in there.
And now for Front Matter?
Isn't this the front matter?
I'm Melanie Killingsworth.
And I'm Stu Willis.
And I'm Chaz Fisher.
And welcome to Draft Zero, a podcast with 2 Australians and 1 aspiring Australian, all filmmakers, where we talk about what makes scripts work.
And welcome to our final part 3, presumably, at this point. of our series on interweaving, intertwining, interweaving timelines. And in this, our previous episodes covered the social network and Destroyer. And in this final section, we're going to be talking about Little Women 2019.
Yeah. The other thing that sets this episode apart from the previous 2 is that this episode, we have the luxury of the 94 Gillian Armstrong version, which both adaptations chose very similar events, but Greta Gerwig has chosen to take those events and tell them in a different order. So we can compare and contrast the audience experience of watching both films and how using interweaving timelines changed that experience.
And this is the third in a series, and what makes what Chaz just said so interesting is that we've got one story. So the first film, Destroyer, which is simply made up of whole cloth, a completely original screenplay. And then we've got The Social Network, which is a biopic, and it's about facts that most of us already know that have happened in fairly recent memory that are taken and then presented out of chronological order. And then we've got this, which is not just an adaptation, but which is an adaptation with many, many, many iterations, and it takes it out of order. So the 3 screenplays are not just using different techniques, but are actually coming at 3 very different starting points in general.
And for me, I think the other difference between the 3 screenplays is, I think, as we talked about in Destroyers, often these kind of interweaving timelines can be very intellectual. They're making us solve the mystery of the past. Or in the case of Social Network, debate a question, is Mark an arsehole or is not? Little Women for me is a profoundly emotional experience, and whatever magic voodoo cinema shit that she is doing, Greta Gerwig has made Little Women way more emotional.
Which is why she was utterly robbed of a directing nomination, because directing the screenplay how you do it, you have to direct the scenes, not just so that you can make sense of where you are chronologically, but the scene transitions whether they're through time or whether they're through a character point of view, are meant to make you feel the emotion of a massive amount of somebody's life compressed into 2.5 hours. And the way that she's able to direct the scene so that your emotional journey is complex but never jarring in a bad way takes a incredible amount of skill as a director to direct what's on the page and to be directing these scenes in different locations with different actors over the span of several months, and to get them so that the emotional through line always runs true is a very difficult thing to do. And she didn't even get a directing nomination, and that is highway robbery.
And look, we have been repeatedly going back to the well of narrative point of view, because if nothing else, interweaving timelines changes narrative point of view. Once again, we repeat for the new listeners, and apologies, I'm not grumping at you, I'm grumping at listening to myself say this again, but narrative point of view is the audience's relationship in time to the characters. So do the audience know more than the characters, at which point they will be feeling concern for what the character may be headed towards? Do they know the exact same amount as the character, at which point they would be in empathy with the character? The choices that the writers and directors are making, the filmmakers, are forcing the audience into a sense of empathy with the character? Or do they know less than the character, at which point the audience is sort of leaning forward with interest? What do they know? Why are they doing what they're doing?
It's a byline, but it's a great way to visualize it. And our understanding of events as if they're things that move, like defining events of people's lives, which is in a way what Little Women is about. The small things and the big things that define who we are.
I'm working on a novel. It is a story of my life and my sister's.
Make it short and spicy. And if the main character is a girl, make sure she's married by the end.
Ow, Joe!
I want to be an artist in Rome and be the best painter in the world.
That's what you want too, isn't it, Joe, to be a famous writer?
Yes, but it sounds so crass when she says it.
My girls have a way of getting into mischief.
Well, so do I. This is Meg, Amy, Beth, and Joe.
I intend to make my own way in the world.
No one makes their own way, least of all a woman. You'll need to marry well.
But you are not married, aren't you?
Well, that's because I'm rich.
Joe, would you like to dance with me?
I can't because I scorched my dress. And Meg told me to keep still so no one would see it.
I have an idea of how we can manage.
Joe is a lost cause. So you are your family's hope now.
I believe we have some power over who we love. It isn't something that just happens to a person.
I think the poets might disagree.
It's an emotional film, and I think so. I've watched it fully twice. I watched it in the theaters, and then I watched it for this podcast. And I've also watched every iteration. I've read the books, I've read the script, etc., etc. But
You watched the 1918 adaptation?
1918, no. The core was what, 33, 34, 36, somewhere in there. I've watched most of the adaptations. I've seen it on stage. I acted in one in high school. We'll really definitely leave that in the dustbin of history. I actually found that it was much detracted from when I was studying it. I enjoyed it as a study, but I did not enjoy it as a film when I was breaking it down for this podcast. Because as soon as you stop it, as soon as you're starting to analyze the transitions and how she's doing it, it starts to crumble because she is directing it as an emotional experience.
And so are you talking about time transitions, or are you talking about transitions in the acting sense?
Both, but I really think the emotional transitions here are what's important, and that she's really directing it as an emotional experience.
Yeah. So for audiences who haven't worked with actors, the idea of the transition is that you are in emotional state A and you need to get to emotional state B, and there is a transition between them. And sometimes that could be in two separate scenes, but there is a transition point. So that, for writers thinking about transitions, not as visual, but how do I take a character from A to B or A to Z, or whatever that difference is the transition that you're talking about at this point.
Okay, now we are For the purposes of this particular episode of Draft Zero, and I think we are going to separately record an adaptations episode comparing different adaptations of Little Women, and we're also going to do a visual breakdown of a scene. But for the purposes of this episode, what Greta Gerwig brought to her 2019 version of Louisa May Alcott's novels in her adaptation of Little Women was interrupting the timelines and presenting the series of events out of the chronological order that Louisa May Alcott presented, and out of order in terms of the 7 previous screen adaptations of this story. So this is why we are so lucky in concluding this particular episode with this film, because we can compare the 2019 Oscar-nominated version of her telling this story out of chronological order with the 94 Academy Award nominated version that told it reasonably within order. And now, while some of the 94 adaptation had some scenes that are not in the 2019 version and vice versa, for the most part, as adaptations, they chose the same bits of the novel, the same scenes, the same events, and they've just chosen to put them in different order. And that is such a great opportunity for this podcast. In terms of a summary, for the purpose of the audience who haven't seen none of the 8 previous screen adaptations, nor watched the anime or read the novels or anything like that.
Do those people exist outside of Stu?
I don't know. But Little Women is a story centered around the March family, 4 sisters with their 2 very progressive parents, the father of which was mostly absent off fighting during the American Civil War. This is my experience, because I haven't read the book, so you can correct me if I'm wrong here, Mel. So this is my experience from watching the different screen adaptations. It's mostly set in Massachusetts, but then in the later half of the story, the sisters disperse and the story moves from Massachusetts to New York, France, and other places. But that is broadly the story. And I think we could bring in some Stephen Cleary discussions around melodrama and stuff like that here, in terms of what drives the story and how the 94 version is sustained versus the 2019 version. But that may be better left to the adaptation version. My suggested approach here is that we look at 3 key moments from the story that are in both the 94 adaptation and the 2019 adaptation, and see how presenting those events in the different orders that they're presented changes the audience experience of those events.
I would like to propose 2 additional.
Right, go.
So use your 3 are Teddy's proposal to Joe.
Yep.
Courtship with Amy.
Mm-hmm.
Beth's death.
Yep.
My additional 2 are the delivery of food to the Hummels, which really leads to Beth's death.
Yes.
And the book burning and ice flow, which are massive both in the book and in the context of the things.
All right, so yes, we are going to do a Little Women versus Little Women showdown, but I think there is a difference in purpose that is worth talking about on a larger level before we break down the specifics of those scenes and how the audience is affected, because it is a coming-of-age story. Right, and often coming-of-age stories are presented linearly because, as the very title, the name of the genre suggests, it's about how someone comes of age. Little Women in the Greta version is about the choices in the past that have made the present. And there is still a plotline in the present. There is enough going on with the present. There is events that we can summarize that is about how we take the characters from A to B, and then it's how the choices in the past have affected those present. Whereas the more quote-unquote faithful it's not even quote-unquote, it is more faithful, because it's worth noting that Little Women was originally 2 novels, which is Little Women and Good Wives.
Yep. And they are completely chronological, but there is a time jump in between the 2.
Yeah, and they do the time jump roughly at the end of the 3rd act in the 94 version, but they have chosen to interweave those novels.
You mean the end of the 2nd act?
Into the 2nd act. But the point is they've made a decision to interweave these stories because it will change the way the audience will feel.
Yeah.
And I would argue that the 94 version is more melodramatic than the Greta version, because the Greta version, by intercutting, is making us ask plot questions. What is the decisions that they made that have led them to be separate? Because Joe living in New York. We see Amy in France. We see Beth at home. We see Meg with her husband. So they're all separate. So they start separate and then we intercut them with in their past and we learn that there are consequences, particularly around Theo. And then we cut to them as past together, and then there's obviously risks between them. And the question becomes, what has happened between these people that they're no longer living together? Whereas in the past, it is a lot more of a and then, and they then, and they then. And it's about the events that make you grow to become Little Women. So it is a subtly different approach to storytelling, but I think that's the for me, and you guys are welcome to disagree, but that is the choice that they've made in terms of how to structure it and the meaning that presents to the audience, the larger meaning, the purpose of the modern adaptation.
Can I suggest that I, in collaboration with you two, briefly summarize the plot points, as we did with Destroyer, with the quote-unquote childhood narrative and then the quote-unquote young adult narrative. And that way we can see how they're presented in chronological order in the 94 adaptation and then contrast that with the 2019 version.
Oh, go for it.
Thumbs up.
Okay. Now, Mel is a much more of an expert of this film than I am. This story, these characters, this narrative. But I will just throw my bias out there that the Greta Gerwig 2019 version was my favorite film of that year, hands down. Like,
It's way up there for me. And this also, I'll put my bias out there. When they announced that Greta Gerwig was doing this version, as someone who cannot tell you how many times I've read these books, I initially knee-jerked, this is going to be terrible. I fucking love this film. I love Gerwig's adaptation. I love her writing, etc. But I'll admit I was very wrong. When they announced it, I was like, this is going to be shit. I was not prepared to love this as much as I did. It is phenomenal.
And my biases are that my wife had expressed a love for the 94 version, had driven me to watch it. I was quietly unimpressed with the 94 version when I watched it about 10 years ago. So around 2010 that I watched the 94 version and then was so blown away by the 2019 version. So the film predominantly follows Jo March, the second of the four sisters, and her drive to be an second in age, and her drive to become an independent novelist, as bucking the expectations on her to marry and settle down and produce children. And each of the different sisters' journeys are a reflection on that as to how much they buck or embrace the social expectations around them.
It's not just social expectations, because as we mentioned on the melodrama episode coverture, which is when then a woman married under common law, Anglo common law countries, they cease to be a legal person.
Yeah.
So marriage literally...
Social, economic, yep.
I've always known I would marry Rich. Why should I be ashamed of that?
There's nothing to be ashamed of, as long as you love him.
Well, I believe we have some power over who we love. It isn't something that just happens to a person.
I think the poets might disagree.
Well, I'm not a poet. I'm just a woman. And as a woman, there's no way for me to make my own money. Not enough to earn a living or to support my family. And if I had my own money, which I don't, that money would belong to my husband the moment we got married. And if we had children, they would be his, not mine. They would be his property. So don't sit there and tell me that marriage isn't an economic proposition, because it is. It may not be for you, but it most certainly is for me.
So the first half of 2/3 of the 94 version involves the childhood of the March sisters and their infatuation with the neighbor across the way, Teddy Lawrence.
Laurie.
And there's a series of events, but it basically moves through the key events that have to be established in that early childhood timeline is the love for these four sisters for each other, Jo's love of writing, how the four sisters love entertaining each other with theatricals and things like that, their care for each other, how their parents have influenced them and raised them to care for people outside themselves.
Explicitly Marmee, but sure. Yeah, both.
Yeah. There's a lot of references to how their dad does that, but you never see it in the adaptations, and I don't know how that's presented in the books. And ultimately, the characters of the 4 different siblings are very well expressed, but I would say in the early things, the key developments for each of the characters is the older sister, Meg, falls in love and commits to marry. Joe commits to moving to New York and being a novelist. Beth, the third sister, contracts scarlet fever and survives it. And the younger sister, Amy, is like the brat of the group who drives everyone to distraction, but then when her life is put at risk, the other 3 sisters learn to love her. To me, those are the core kind of elements of the first part of the story as is presented to us.
I'm gonna break down that further because you've just given where their conclusions are. But there's the key events within that is that they meet the next door neighbor, Theo.
Teddy/Laurie.
Yeah, Laurie. Yeah. Why am I?
Because his name is Theodore Lawrence. So it's Teddy or Laurie.
Oh, sorry. I didn't know anyone was here.
Not at all. Stay if you'd like.
I won't disturb you.
No, I don't know many people here. I felt rather strange at first, you know.
So do I.
Miss March, isn't it?
Yes, Mr. Lawrence, but I'm not Miss March. I'm only Joe.
And I'm not Mr. Lawrence, I'm only Laurie.
Him and Joe have an immediate connection. But there's also an important beat that we see that Amy is also infatuated with him. So I like the idea that the whole family is kind of infatuated with him in different aspects.
Yep, and he's infatuated with the family both as individuals and as the concept of family, because he doesn't really have one.
No, yes, right. And he's got a tutor,
John Brooke,
that also meets Meg. That's a key event. And in some ways, the mommy and her husband's relationship echoes, and the adaptation, both adaptations, we're not going to go into the different, kind of emphasize this differently, but there is an echo between Meg and Marmie's relationship with their husbands and Meg and John, in that he's a poor but a good man, right? He's not interesting, he's not exciting, but he's an intellectual.
That's why you should heed me.
Yeah, so I can get married.
No, so you can live a better life than your poor mother has.
But Marmee loves her life.
You don't know what she loves. Your father cared more about educating freedmen's children than he did about caring for his own family.
Yes, but he was right.
Well, it's possible to be right and foolish.
Well, I don't think so.
Well, you're not paid to think.
Importantly, the main thing that I missed is that the first section is during the father's absence because he has volunteered to serve during the American Civil War, and it's during winter. It's during one season, one particular winter, where they are super poor because of the absence of their... Super poor is unfair description in contrast to the Hummels, but they have experienced...
relatively to themselves poor.
Yes, thank you. And it culminates with the return of the father.
I'm actually going to go back to something we've alluded to, but essentially you should if I was plotting this, I'd reframe them as character choices. So Meg meets John and then he's offered the hand of marriage by John and then says yes.
Want to get married.
Why?
Because I love him.
You will be bored of him in 2 years, and we will be interesting forever.
Just because my dreams are different than yours doesn't mean they're unimportant.
Joe meets Teddy, or Laurie. They get on very well. Is Joe's rejection of Laurie that leads Joe to going to New York. So in terms of them being a family, it is a choice that makes consequences. Beth's choice to go and look after the family,
the Hummels,
leads her to having scarlet fever.
I'm going into town for groceries. Joe, can you look into getting more firewood?
You all haven't been to see the Hummels. We should go.
Oh, Bethy, we barely have enough to feed ourselves.
Besides, I have to finish this story.
Marmee said that. Marmee told us to do lots of things, but we can't possibly do them all.
But I always go by myself, and you haven't been keeping up with your tasks.
We do. We work. Don't worry, sweet girl. We'll find a time.
That's why I listed as one of the 5 that I wanted to talk about.
Yeah. And the question is, what choice does Amy make in the past that leads her to where the present is? And ultimately, I don't know if she is a victim of chance or if she makes...
She's quite passive. she doesn't make a choice until France. She makes a choice, but it's not until she's already in France. The things before then happen to her. She's quite passive.
Mommy! What? Our March is going to Europe! Oh, and she wants me to go with her!
And then, I mean, look, she's active in burning Joe's book. She's active in whatever. But in terms of what actually leads her directly to Laurie, in terms of what leads her to becoming a little woman, it's quite passive until she gets to France.
So into the plot choices, she doesn't actually really make a choice is made for her, which is that she goes to Aunt March, which is their grumpy rich aunt, and then through that leads her to go to France in the second half. And what I'm talking about here, what is interesting and looking at Destroyer, is plotting through character choice.
Yeah.
Right? That these characters are given, there is something that happens that leads them to make a choice, and they make a choice. And that happens in Destroyer. Oh, we're going undercover. We have to fake being in a relationship. Now we're choosing to be in a relationship, choosing to keep the baby, choosing to steal the money, choosing to go inside. Don't choose to get killed, but that's the consequence of it. It's choice and consequence, right? Social network is choice and consequence. Past is choice. The flash forward is consequence. Same with Little Women, right? Choice, consequence. Little Women in the past still presents those same choice, but we don't know what the consequences are. What is interesting about seeing the consequences first, which is what 2019, we see the consequences and therefore we are wondering what the choice is.
Well, what's really fascinating is, Chaz, when you broke down Destroyer in terms of 3 timelines, Little Women almost is the same thing. There's 3 timelines. You've got the past and quote-unquote present, but then the present splits. When we're watching Little Women, particularly 2019, you know that you're fed all of this information, but you quote unquote catch up to a point where you don't know what happens beyond that point. And then it becomes a 3rd timeline, and it's a very truncated timeline. It's very small in the scheme of things. Same with Destroyer. There's a very truncated timeline.
Yes.
That is
that where you are aware of the 3 timelines.
Exactly.
100%. That 2019 does the same thing. I think it does it for different reasons and does it far more effectively, but that is a very biased point of view.
I'll agree with you.
So let's come to the good wise versions we haven't summarized. So we've talked about their choices in the past. So what are the consequences in the decision, and what do those consequences lead in terms of cause and effect? Cause and effect produces a new cause.
So Meg has married John Brooke and has had twins and is living a relatively impoverished life that, as you say, Stu, reflects the life of and choices, particularly of her mother, in terms of, I chose to marry a good man over marry for advantage.
And the difference between the 2019 version and the 1994 is in the 2019, they've made it clearer that she's kind of poorer than Mommy was.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
I know you're angry, John. I don't mean to waste your money, but I can't resist when I see Sally buying all she wants and pitying me because I don't. I try to be contented, but it is hard. And I'm tired of being poor.
I was afraid of this.
She didn't know what she was in for. She was kind of a little bit idealistic.
Not just poorer, but lesser social standing.
Yeah. So Joe has moved to New York to be a teacher of a boarding house owner's children. And in doing so is both supporting her family back home through the wages she earns there, but also through selling her stories to magazines. And in doing so, meets a kind of intellectual literati at the boarding house. But in terms of the plot decisions, she's called back to Boston. Sorry, not to Concord. She's called back to Massachusetts because of Beth, who we will discuss in a second, and ultimately chooses to open a school in Massachusetts.
So there's 2 choices, right? One, which is she meets someone that she's got a connection with, and then her Aunt March has specifically said, you have ruined yourself for marriage because you like books. Then she meets a professor who likes books and likes the fact that she can write. but then he criticizes her writing and then she gets defensive. But the choice is ultimately, do I stay in New York? Like, it's a romantic comedy, a romantic choice, not a romantic choice. Do I stay in New York with Frederick or do I go and see my sister? And the choice is obvious. I'm going to go and see my sister. But she doesn't leave him a forwarding address. But it's still a choice that is presented in the timeline, and the way that they've interwoven it is that we don't know. Well, we kind of do, but we kind of don't. Like, it's a little bit faked about what are the consequences of that choice of going back to see Beth. Amy is in France, and this is the other choice. Amy is in France, and we learn that she is engaged to this guy called Freddie.
Courting.
Promise of engagement.
Courting. She explicitly decides to turn down his engagement.
Yeah. The main story for Amy in both versions is her falling in love and marrying Teddy, even though Teddy has been previously rejected by Joe. Like, let's put it in terms of major character and plot points. That is it.
Absolutely.
Right?
Don't marry him.
What?
Don't marry him.
Why?
Why? You know why.
No. No.
Yes.
No. Laurie.
What?
You're being mean. Stop it. Stop it. I have been second to Joe my whole life in everything. And I will not be the person you settle for just because you cannot have her. I won't do it. I won't, not when I've spent my entire life loving you.
And then Beth, whom we sadly skipped over, because of the goodness of her heart in the first part where she contracted scarlet fever, her main storyline in the second half is to die of scarlet fever. As much as we're laughing about this now, we have all been exchanging messages about how much we've been crying in both versions of the film.
I know it's coming. I still sob like a baby.
Columbia Pictures invites you to share the holidays with a family of little women. Joe.
If I were going to be a writer, I'd go to New York and pursue the stage. Are you shocked?
Very.
Meg.
What's that strange smell?
You've ruined me!
Beth.
What's your Christmas wish?
Perhaps we could send the Hummels our bread. They have so little and we have so much.
Amy.
I've waited my whole life to be kissed. And what if I miss it?
I promise to kiss you before you die.
Mommy's home! Telegram. Your father's been wanted.
But I feel like it would be fair to say that all three of us, in preparation for this podcast recording, experienced the chronological telling of this story, the second half, the Good Wives section of this story, in the 94 adaptation, to have less narrative impetus than the 2019 version. Is that a fair assumption to say on behalf of all of you?
Yeah.
Yep, 100%.
Yeah. Okay. And so specifically, I did not know the story of Little Women, and I watched the 2019 version because I knew I couldn't experience the nonlinear version except first I had to see it first. Right? So, because I was ultimately I'm going to, what we're kind of hinting at is this idea that once you rewatch these kinds of films with interweaving timeline, they mature in the way that a really good whiskey matures in or a beer in an oak barrel, right? Because those questions, those hierarchies of question, where are we in time, we kind of know, right? So that makes it easier for us to access character. Mm-hmm. So I specifically chose to watch the 2019 version first, so to experience the events in that film, right? Mm-hmm. As they were. So
this is like a science experiment because
it is.
Literally my 8th birthday, my mother gifted me a copy of this, and I probably read it every year for the next 10 years. Like, it's fascinating to me to and look, part of that is just because I'm American, right? Like, it's a much more part of an American cultural identity. But like to meet someone who didn't know the twist and who experienced it that way is really fascinating.
You look like you like girls. You know who else looks like they like girls, Joe?
Fucking Joe March, mate.
Okay. So specifically what I want to drill down to that is I agree. There was less dramatic impetus in the 94 adaptation. The point is the key choice is that Joe chooses to reject Laurie and therefore in the 94 version goes to New York. Right? And we have her go, I need to get out of this place. I need to go to New York in the 2019. We never actually see that decision explained. Right? She's just in New York.
She explains it later, but yes. 2019, she explicitly explains it, but she explains it in the letter that she writes to Laurie. I ran away is the term she uses in the 2019 version.
And what's kind of interesting is they play her rejection of Laurie at roughly the same point. It's roughly 2/3 of the way through the film, but it's also...
Through a 40-minute longer film, but yes.
But it's also connected to Beth's death, right? So Beth's death becomes the kind of 2/3 of the way through.
But we're talking about Laurie's proposal here, which was my number one point to contrast between the two films, right? So in the Gillian Armstrong adaptation where it happens chronologically, and I say chronologically, it's like as Louisa May Alcott has determined to present the series of events. She has made her own decisions as to what, quote unquote, the chronology of these semi-fictional people is to be. But my experience in the 94 version of Joe rejecting Laurie is somewhat of surprise, right? Because we have...
You expected them to get together.
Yes. They had a real connection, right? But I think it's an interesting trade-off for the purposes of screenwriting and people choosing whether to interweave or not. The point that we get to Joe rejecting Laurie in the 94 version, it comes across as, oh my God, that is a surprise. Now I'm posing the question. So I've experienced surprise as an audience member, and now I'm asking why she does that and what are the consequences of it. Now, in the 2019 version, the second scene of the whole film is Amy meeting Laurie in France in the future saying, I'm so sorry Joe rejected you.
Relaxing,
and
yes.
gambling
Well,
and drinking.
don't tell your mother.
Are you chasing some young girl across Europe?
No.
I couldn't believe Joe turned you down. I'm so sorry.
Don't be, Amy. I'm not.
I fucking love it. It blew my mind when I saw it in theaters. I went, wait, what?
So they have traded surprise for something else.
Dramatic irony. The audience knows what's about to happen.
Hey, Eduardo, Mark screwed you over. How the fuck did that feel? It's the same beat.
Yes, it is 100%. And this is kind of why I wish we'd done Little Women before we'd done The Social Network, Stu. But in the two different structures, Laurie's proposal to Joe has a very different effect on the audience. So Laurie's proposal in the 94 version, where things are happening chronologically, his proposal is expected and Joe's rejection of him is a surprise, and then it prompts us, it is, I feel, supposed to provide the narrative impetus into the second or the final third of the film where we go, all right, Joe has rejected Laurie in order to achieve what?
Desperately sorry. But I do care for you. With all of my heart, you're my dearest friend. I just can't go be a wife.
You say you won't, but you will.
I won't.
One day, you'll meet some man, a good man, and you will love him tremendously.
Right? Whereas in the 2019 version, we have already, first of all, we know from the second scene of the film that Joe rejects Laurie. And not only that, we have seen her struggling in New York and not achieving what she hopes to achieve as being an independent woman in the 1800s in East Coast USA.
weirdly, coming back to my observation about her being coded queer in the 2019 version, because I seen your message. I've not seen this film.
In every version.
Every version except the Winona Ryder version.
In the fucking motherfucking book. As someone who was 8 years old and didn't realize she was queer and went, wait a second. But yeah, fucking Katharine Hepburn. Come on. But yes.
My point is, but I can't be a queer woman going, this is what I'm identifying with queer woman.
Yep.
I'm saying as a male identifying person, I read that and I watched it and went, oh, she's queer and she doesn't know it. Right. And I think the choice of her rejecting Laurie means that I sit there and look at them and go, oh, that's what's going on. I'm already there.
That's fucking fascinating to me, honestly.
Look, yes, what I mean by coded is the choice of wardrobe and the lines and the way she carries herself. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that they're doing visually and in terms of performance. But narratively, that choice means I'm reading all their interactions through this idea that she's going to reject him. And it's like, is he going to offend her? But clearly the idea that Amy and he are on good terms, I'm thinking it's something else. And then it's like, well, yeah, okay, she's gay and she doesn't realize it. That's cool.
You put your finger right on the money. In the 94 version, you are seeing them as young male and female identifying people in the 1800s having a real human connection, right? And you translate that automatically to they must therefore fall in love, get married, right? In the constraints of the story. And what makes the story so amazing is that does not happen, right? In the 2019 version, it tells you that that is not happening. Again, I just want to reiterate from what we've learned from Destroyer and from The Social Network, this film, in contrast to the 94 version, 2/3 of the film is the childhood, and then the last third is the 7 years later. Whereas the 2019 version is very much flashbacks, because it starts the film and establishes the film with all four sisters and mommy in the quote unquote present day version and flashes back to the childhood stories. And I think this is an important thing. Yeah, this is a very important thing to identify.
It's like Destroyer. It is about what are the choices that they made in their past that have made them pay the price,
the consequences.
In the case of
positive or negative, there are consequences.
The positive for Amy, it seems like a positive. Joe, it seems like a relative negative. Meg, it's definitely a negative.
Ooh, interesting. That sounds judgy.
I think no. I think they've made a decision, because later we go, oh no, she still loves him. They seem like they're on good terms. But at the beginning of Little Women 2019, Meg's relationship with John is not portrayed in a good light. Like literally, they shoot it dark. They shoot it gritty. Like that whole conversation about money is like around a candle. They specifically frame it about the fact that their relationship seems like it's struggling. Right?
Around money.
So it's around money. So it is definitely about the quote-unquote sins of the past and the effect on the present, which is not what the first film was about.
And the 2019 version, it builds to Laurie's proposal in such a way that you know the outcome of it, and yet you still want to see. You are so desperate to see that scene.
I think, yes, but I think that actually makes the scene play better, because you know the outcome, so you're invested in why, as opposed to what. Will she say yes or no is the outcome, is what happens in the 1994 version, as opposed to why will she say no?
And not only why, but how. How will she reject Laurie such that Laurie is so crushed as we see him in the early debauched versions of himself? Because
still wearing the ring, still distraught, still open to Amy? Like, how does he get
to me,
there?
This is what I want listeners to kind of take from this, is you are trading off, by doing these parallel timelines, you are trading off the experience of surprise and being in the present with the characters versus other sensations such as dread, but it's more posing character questions rather than plot questions. And I think that is true of Destroyer and of The Social Network, that by telling us early on what the outcome of these decisions are before we've experienced with them, you are changing the nature of the question. We know what the outcome of the plot question is, and instead you're going, why does someone do this? how does someone do this? What does that make them feel? What are we feeling with them in the time? And we're dreading it happening we're dreading in Destroyer. We don't know what it is, but we're dreading whatever it is that happens that turns younger Aaron into present Aaron.
Why is Aaron an alcoholic? Why are Eduardo and Mark not friends anymore? Why has Joe rejected, or how has Laurie gotten?
Broadly speaking, in one word, regret. You could sit there and say all these films about regret, which for a lot of people, as you get older, your adult life is just regret.
Yes. And I think only one of them redeems itself, which is Little Women.
But like Amy, I don't think Amy lives a life of regret, right? And I think ultimately Joe doesn't either. But like the emotion of regret is ultimately about the choices that I like.
Yes, I think that's a bit simplistic for Little Women. The cyclical nature of things and how you learn to live with it and make it better for I love the emotionality of Little Women in general.
And also in Little Women, right up until the last 20 minutes of the film, Joe is expressing regret.
Perhaps I was too quick in turning him down. Laurie.
Do you love it?
If he asked me again, I think I would say yes. Do you think he'll ask me again?
But do you love him?
I care more to be loved. I want to be loved.
That is not the same as loving.
I know. You know, I just feel like women, they have minds and they have souls as well as just hearts, and they've got ambition and they've got talent as well as just beauty. And I'm so sick of people saying that love is just all a woman is fit for. I'm so sick of it. But I'm so lonely.
Oh, I'm so lonely all the time. Fucking rip my heart out of my chest.
And if Laurie were to ask me again, I would say yes, without knowing. The audience knows.
Yep. Dramatic irony.
That Laurie is married to fucking Amy at that point.
And that Professor Bear exists and is in love with her, which is fascinating.
I'm not marrying Fred.
I heard about that.
And you are under no obligation to say anything or do anything. I just didn't love him as I should. So we don't need to talk about it. We don't need to say anything.
My dear Teddy, I miss you more than I can express. I used to think that the worst fate was to be a wife. I was young and stupid. But now I have changed. The worst fate is to live my life without you in it. I was wrong to turn you down and to run away to New York.
So look, we've already gone into the proposal and I've rabbited on long enough about how in the chronological 94 version, Laurie's proposal kind of feels like surprise, and we are going, oh, where did that come from? Why is Joe reacting the way we're reacting? You know, we're with her. But in a weird kind of way, as much as we've said, knowing more than the character makes us sort of feel fear for what they're walking into, in the 2019 version, Greta has put us in the position of knowing that Joe will reject Laurie, and we know what that does to her life, and and she's deliberately held the moment back until the later part in the movie. But in a weird kind of way, even though it's supposed to be feeling dread, it actually made me feel more with her in that moment, even knowing what was going to happen. What was your guys' emotional experience of watching Joe reject Laurie, knowing that she was going to reject him?
Here's an interesting question. Did Joe know that she was past Joe? It's interesting because I think in the 94 version, it was a genuine surprise to her because I think she thinks Laurie is below her. But maybe this is just my interpretation of it because of the interweaving timelines. It isn't, I think, and maybe I'm wrong. I'd watch the scene again and I could disagree with myself. But with hindsight, it feels like to me that it's not like her. She finds herself surprised to say, I don't want to marry you. I think she knows that she doesn't want to marry him. And therefore she's like dreaded this moment. But that could be because I'm dreading it before she gets there.
From my memory, like he looks at her and she says no.
Meg married. Amy off to Europe. And now that you're a graduate, you'll be off on a long holiday. It's not good like Beth, so I'm angry and I'm restless.
You don't have to stay here, Joe.
Why should we run off and join a pirate ship? No.
It's no use, Joe.
Please
Joe,
don't.
we've got to have it out.
No,
I have
Teddy.
loved you ever since I've known you, Joe. I couldn't help it. And I tried to show and you wouldn't let me, which is fine.
No.
But I must make you here now and give me an answer because I cannot go on like this
Teddy,
any longer.
please
I gave
don't.
up billiards. I gave up everything you didn't like. I'm happy I did. It's fine. And I waited and I never complained because I figured you'd love me, Joe.
Like she knows that a proposal that he has loved her and she doesn't want him to say it because that will ruin everything.
Yeah, you're right. She does. In which case, what I just said is valid. Like, I feel that it is a moment we experience that she's dreaded having to tell him no, but she knew it was kind of part of her knew it was coming, which is different in the 94 version, which is like, oh, what? No.
I mean, I would concur with that. I think both versions to some degree, although the Gerwig a little bit more, make it explicit that part of Teddy's whole deal is that he loves all of them genuinely, and he's confusing a lot of his feelings around wanting to be part of the family and his immense closeness and emotional connection and kinship with Joe for that sort of not just romantic love, but compatibility. And Joe has seen that coming, but has just sort of hoped that Teddy will wake up and realize that it wouldn't work. And so that's where when he starts saying it, she just thinks, oh God, no. She's seen it coming, but she just keeps thinking, no, he won't actually do this. He'll figure this out. Oh no, he won't put me in that position. Oh no, he'll change his mind. Oh no, he'll realize. Oh no, somebody will talk him out of this. And a bit bullheadedly, just, well, I'm not going to address it. I'm just going to ignore, repress. And then when it comes and smacks her in the face and she has to deal with it, she gets very flustered.
Well, I think, Stu, you've just made a really interesting observation that hadn't occurred to me. In both versions, they've had to write Joe's experience of it to align with the audiences. So
yeah,
Winona Ryder is as surprised as the audience is. Whereas in the Greta Gerwig version, Saoirse Ronan's portrayal, like her Joe, is as dreading it as much the audience is.
Yes.
That's good.
So
we're done here.
Yep. And Dustin, no, that's a great observation. And the fact that it obviously, as I've watched it, knowing the story so well, every time I'm sort of dreading it. But you're right that the Greta Gerwig thing is the timeline, the fact that we know from almost I believe the second scene where we meet Amy and France, we know this is coming, really enables Gerwig to, again, make it a more emotional experience as opposed to a narrative or plot experience.
Or maybe boom, boom, boom. She has written the 2019 Little Women from the perspective of someone who's read both Little Women and Good Wives. So she's writing the emotional experience in the interweaving timelines as someone who's read both books and possibly the sequels and is experiencing them. Because I imagine when you... Okay. Right. So when you're coming up to that moment when she rejects them, you as a reader who is already familiar with what happens in the future is going, oh God, don't do that. Right? And then she's kind of found a way in the interweaving timelines to capture or recreate the emotional complexity that comes from rereading or revisiting material.
So let's move on from Laurie's proposal, which we've already established is kind of like surprise versus like a character question.
It's maybe surprise versus regret, but regret has got a very specific emotional tone. So maybe there's a more generic term.
Should we talk about Laurie and Amy's courtship? Because that is presented very differently in the two films. Because to me, in the
courtship's a generous word for the 94 version.
The 94 version, I think, fails at the Amy-Laurie courtship.
I think it fails, though, not necessarily for a script reason.
I slightly disagree that I think it fails based on format. Like, they only had literally 2 scenes to make after Laurie had been rejected by Joe to convince the audience that Laurie has fallen in love with Joe's younger sister over in France, while also establishing that he has been wrecked by Joe's rejection of him back in Massachusetts.
I'm reminded of a promise. Didn't I say I would kiss you before you die?
Do you hear from Jo? She has befriended a German professor.
Yes, well, no doubt he's showing her the ways of the world.
I do not wish to be courted by someone who is still in love with my sister.
I'm not in love with Jo.
Then how do you explain your jealousy?
I envy her happiness. I envy his happiness. I envy John Brooke for marrying Meg. I hate Fred Vaughn. If Beth had a lover, I would despise him too. Just as you have always known you would never marry a pauper. I have always known I should be part of the March family.
I do not wish to be loved for my family.
Any more than Fred Vaughn wishes to be loved for his $40,000 a year.
Format, length, structure, all of the above.
Well, that's what we're talking about here, though, isn't it, right? And in Greta Gerwig's amazing podcast episode with John August on Script Notes, so I recommend that everyone goes to that. For her, it was really important to show Laurie's first appearance with Amy, because she knew that if you see a man and a woman appear together in the first scene, you will expect them to be together. Like, there's audience expectations, and she had so much mastery of that kind of insight and craft that suddenly you are okay. It completely changes the Laurie and Amy courtship.
It's more true in movies than any other medium that the person you see them with first is the person you believe they should be with. I don't know why it works like that. I just think it tends to work like that. And so one thing when you tell the story straight through is that, you see Laurie and Joe together. And when it's like Laurie and Amy, you're like, what the hell is this? I've been with these other people. The second thing is then when you meet Professor Bear, you're like, and who's this guy? Like, I don't know this guy. I don't care about this guy. I've never met this guy.
I don't want him in my movie.
I know. He's an old German professor. Like, who cares?
Her whole script and her direction uses our expectations against us, which is a compliment.
Or for us, because I absolutely had that reaction with her going...
Yeah, which is why I say it's a compliment. Yeah, 100%.
Like her Aunt March just rolling her eyes. And it's like, oh, it's Laurie.
Oh my God.
It's just Laurie. It's like, oh yeah, she's clearly going to leave the fiancé for this friend of the family.
100%, right? Whereas in the Gillian Armstrong version, they literally had 2.5 scenes.
Which is also great.
Yes, I do genuinely enjoy that movie, cried during that movie, enjoyed that movie. But the Laurie and Amy courtship is literally 2.5 scenes. And I say 2.5 because 0.5 is a voiceover of Amy reading a letter from Laurie.
My darling Amy, it is you I want, and not your family. I have gone to London to make myself worthy of you. Please, do not do anything we shall regret.
Those are choices of the screenwriters and directors and producers of the film, right? So they have chronologically actually a lot tougher time to convince us of the appropriacy of the Laurie-Amy relationship than in the 2019 version by starting it out of order. So there is we've got to just acknowledge that what we see first in a film is going to actually color the rest of the movie. And that is a major advantage in telling things out of time. As much as there's I meant to mention this in the beginning of this episode and I didn't, but the Stewart special, like script notes have criticized so much that putting the second turn, like the low point of the film is the opening scene of a film as the Stewart special. So we start with the low point of the film and then we cut back to however many weeks, months, years earlier. It was happening so often in both movies and scripts that they were saying that they called it the fucking Stewart special because...
And then Craig Mazin did it in Chanel, so, you know.
100%, right?
It's a cliche because it works a lot of the time.
But the broader point is that we are so affected by what we see first in a story. Like, that's the major takeaway that I'm taking from this.
Especially in film, because you have 2 hours as opposed to television where you might have 10 to 80 hours.
I just want to point out some other things, like that the fact that our first experience of Laurie is Laurie as wrecked by Joe's rejection means that when we see him as a young man full of joy and love for Joe, we actually experience that, like you say, Stu, as regret or sadness, because we know how that's going to end. And we also long for him to come out of it.
Because we've all been there, right?
Yeah. So coming back to audience questions and specifically how they frame them, the question that you ask when you have that audience expectation about him and Amy is how are these two, the question for the present timeline is how will these two come together? It creates a question which is non-existent in a linear version. So you're sitting there going, how will these two? So when he says, like, actually, I kind of like, I get from the beginning that Amy is completely infatuated with him.
From the beginning of the 2019, right? Not
yeah.
Because 1994 has two problems. The first is that it is a little bit more slavish to the book, but you've got Kristen Dunst, who's phenomenal, but is also very young. You never read that as her being in love.
I read his infatuation.
Laurie.
But my point is, where I want to go with it is a thematic. What is the purpose? What is the purpose of this? Is that in the 94 version, I think you can interpret Laurie marrying Amy as because he's got no other options.
Well, he even says he feels he's entitled to belonging to the March family.
Right.
So that made me fucking hate Laurie and Amy's courtship because it looked like I'm just going to marry whichever March comes along that gets me into the family.
Because I have money, so I can. Which is not how it feels in the book, by the way. I mean,
and not how it feels in the 2019 version. Like in the 2019 version, you see, because of the first scenes that we see between Amy and Laurie, we then, because we have this expectation that they're going to fall in love, we then see him and accept him falling in love. Whereas I did not in the 94 version ever accept Christian Bale's Laurie falling in love with, apologies, I do not remember the actress who plays the older version of Amy in the 94 version, but it just felt wrong.
Nobody does.
Wrong.
Well, I mean, it may be era correct, but when he turns to 12-year-old Kirsten Dunst is like, I'm going to kiss you.
Yes.
And then we cut to a scene like 4 years later where he kisses her, or 7 years later or whatever it is. You're like, yeah, that's kind of creepy, right?
Look, they compress the time in the 2019 version and they try to hide it better with the casting, but let's save that for the adaptations discussion.
All right, so what are the other 4 scenes that we've still yet to talk about?
Beth's death.
Why does everyone want to go away? I love being home. But I don't like being left behind. Now I'm the one going ahead. I am not afraid. I can be brave like you. But I know I shall be homesick for you, even in heaven.
Stu, you've seen both versions out of order compared to Mel and I. Tell us how Beth's death hit you differently in the different versions.
Okay, so this possibly will speak to the adaptation thing. Beth dying is not something that has happened off screen. She gets sick with scarlet fever in the past timeline, and then they get called back to France at roughly the same time. They might not completely overlap, but they're more later in the film. It's not that she's gotten sick, right? There is more time with Beth. They go to the beach. So there's a little bit more of a concurrency of those events, almost like Joe's decision to go back to Beth forces her to look back on the past of Beth getting sick with scarlet fever. What the 2019 version did is gave us the two scenes of Beth going to see, actually, no, they kind of invert it from Emily, like Beth going to see the family that is sick. The Hummels, right? So in the 2019 version, we actually see the whole family go to the Hummels together at Christmas to give them some food at the suggestion of Mommy. In the 1994 version, it is actually Joe who suggests that they go and give some food to the Hummels, and we don't actually see them give them the food, but we see Beth go and handle the baby, right? Where in the 94 version, I don't actually think we see Beth turn up there, but we see her come back.
Oh, no, hold on.
Really
Sorry. I'm going to stop you for 1 second, because Claire Danes' biggest acting performance of her entire career is her chin wobbling while holding the baby in the 94 version.
Yeah, that's what I said. The 94 version, we definitely see her to the Hamlet, but the only time we see that is when Beth goes alone.
Yes.
And I actually think it's the opposite.
Yes. Yeah.
We don't see Beth.
Correct.
So in the 2019 version, it's this very fascinating where she leaves the March house, she walks by Mr. Lawrence to deliver the slippers on her way to the Hummels, and in both places, at Mr. Lawrence's house, she speaks to a servant unseen. We never see the servant. She hands over the slippers she's embroidered. And then at the Hummels, the door opens and she's kind of almost drawn in. It's almost this very, almost supernaturally sort of thing where she just gets pulled through the door. Which is really quite fascinating.
You're asking what I felt differently. And I think what's interesting about Beth's death is that both films kind of handle them roughly the same way. It's a surprise.
I have a very different experience because of where they happen in the film. In the chronological telling of the story, in the 94 version, Beth's initial contraction of scarlet fever and her illness takes up a large chunk of the childhood, the past timeline. And then in the 94 version, Joe is called back to Concord from New York for essentially 1 or 2 scenes. The whole second episode of Beth's illness happens within 1 or 2 scenes at the low, quote unquote, the low point of the film, but after a lot of stories happened. The genius of the 2019 version is it intercuts both the childhood contraction of Beth's illness with her survival and her death. So the scene of Beth overcoming scarlet fever, coming down on Christmas Day, and Pa arriving back, that scene of such joy in the 2019 version, which is the transition point in the 94 version, is the very scene before Beth's death in the 2019 version. They deal with her maladies and their outcomes interweaving and bouncing back and forth concurrently in the 2019 version, and that both operates to give it narrative drive, but also thematic potency.
Oh, there's literally a cut that is a mid-shot profile on Joe looking at the grave and then outside, and then it's
This is in my 14-page breakdown, by the way. Yeah, it's a match.
It's a match cut. Pretty much the same profile to her, long haired out, inside the window, looking at Beth outside recovered.
It's beautiful. Not just that, but also just real quick, Chaz, to touch on what Chaz just said, I actually think that this comes down to a script level. The 1994 script makes a very intentional decision because the book takes Joe and Beth to the seaside. The 1994 version jettisons that and keeps them at home. And not only does that keep everything confined in space, keep everything confined in the shots, but it keeps things thematically very similar to everything we've seen before, whereas the 2019 version decides to go to the seaside, which manages then to contrast, to juxtapose, to whatever the fuck term you want to use, follows the book ability to say this is a very sort of separate thing. Nowhere else have we seen the seaside, and the 2019 version also makes a very tiny jaunt to the sea, which is where they introduce Amy to Fred Vaughn. But I really think that the adaptation differences when the 1994 version deviates from the book there and keeps them at home and keeps Beth's dying all in the one confined space, it's actually much to its detriment. It never lets us get out of there either logistically, thematically, pragmatically, thematically, any of the ways.
So you had this observation off mic, off camera, as it were, that brought POV narrative point of view back into this, and it was in relation to Beth's death. So do you want to just throw the stew grenade?
Look, I just described Beth's death as it's kind of like a surprise, right? And that's because Gerwig has gone out of her way that in the present timeline, as in them as adults, and in the past timeline, we have no idea what's happened to Beth. Right, either for positive or negative. Part of that is because in the present day, we're following primarily Amy and Joe, but we do learn roughly what's happened to Meg.
And we're following Joe and Amy in far-flung places, so we're mostly in New York and Paris and not at the March family home.
Right, so we can sit there and we might learn that Beth has suddenly a concertina. We don't know, or I don't know, having watched this the first time. And then that means that we experience this really complicated feeling around regret and loss and grief. And this is, I think now, having think about it, it's how it works. That we experience the loss, the death of Beth in the present, in a position of empathy, right, with Joe. Yes, Joe is asked to come back home and we assume that Beth is getting worse. Right, and that creates a sense of dread, both in the past timeline and in the present timeline, but we don't know what's going to happen, or I didn't, right? And then we experience her loss in the present with Joe. We are aligned with Joe about what is being taken from her, and that is being intercut with the past, where Beth gets sick and recovers. And we experience that in a position of empathy with past Joe, with young Joe. But it is also has this element of tragedy of you look happy that she is recovered, but we know that in 4 years or whatever the specific amount of time is, we know that soon she'll be taken from you. And it creates this incredible sense of, well, as we talked about, concern. So you get this incredibly intercutting of those moments, creating completely complicated emotional experience that feels very adult. Because it's as if her in the present timeline, and we get to experience that surprise, that shock of Beth's death, is looking back on her past and both feeling that sense of relief and that sense of fear. I mean, I maybe that's why it hits so much. It is closer to the feeling of grief, right, than anything I've experienced, in terms of the film. That sense of grief being both you're in the present and in the past and in the future. And it is it's that whole where am I in time. We've been trying to think of examples of the narrative point of view where you're uncertain in time. That intercutting deliberately kind of throws you out in time. It both grounds you, but mostly it's about making you unsure in time, because that is the complexity of grief, of loss, is You know, when you remember someone and then you have those moments of like, yeah, they're no longer with me, and how awful that is. You know, when you're like, oh, I'm looking forward to seeing that person, and you remember when they're not there anymore. Like, all that stuff is just, that is what kills you. And I think the film does it by the intercutting of those timelines and the complexity. And it may or may not be conscious, but by paralleling those moments just gives this incredible, yeah.
Beth gets sick and then she gets better. And then Beth gets sick and then she dies. And I always find that's like a little hard narratively to kind of get like, oh no, oh, it's okay. Oh no, it's not. So one idea I had was just that stacking. And then there are poetic reasons within the stacking of
there's scenes where like, yes. You know, she comes down and sees her there, sees
exactly.
her not there. Yeah.
And that feeling of like, when someone dies, I think you have this inherent feeling of like, but they were just there and it was just the other way. And I felt like it was a way to cinematically give us that.
So, I mean, in the 94 version where it's told chronologically, you know, Claire Danes' Beth and that death scene is incredibly evocative, but it has to spend a lot of time in the scene building us up to that grief that the interweaving one doesn't. But did you feel Beth's death less in the 94 version? And I guess there's a question for both of you. Again, like trying to interrogate these moments through narrative point of view. In both films, we don't know Beth is going to die until she dies, right? Because they don't show Beth dying in the Greta Gerwig version before the recovery, right? But they are intercutting the entirety of both sicknesses.
Look, I think I was like, oh, I think Beth's version in the 94 version worked better because you had more sense of Joe's relationship with Beth, right? But that's also because they've deliberately made the decision for Beth not to have relationships outside of her family. So in the Greta Gerwig version, she develops a friendship with her neighbor, which gives her a life independent of the family, which in hindsight is probably a stronger choice. And I can understand why Greta's doing that, where in the past she's a little bit more completely beholden to who her family is. She just wants to play for them, right? She plays for them. The piano is about her playing for them and providing enjoyment for them, whereas in the Greta Gerwig version, her musical ability is just as much for her, which in the sense about, I'm just thinking aloud here, like being a film about female economic independence is also about women's agency, because she can play for herself. Yes, the neighbor listens in on her, but she's playing for herself and her own enjoyment. It's not her in service of anyone else, where all Beth in the 94 version is someone who's in service of others, right? And so I feel Joe's loss in the 94 version, but I feel a kind of more complexity in the 2019 version. And I reckon if I rewatch the 25, in the same way that Arrival, the second time I watched it, and like Arrival killed me the second time, because knowing what to come added a whole other layer to it that, ugh.
I think for me, obviously I knew what was coming and had experienced it over different films. So I think it's a bit of a different question for me. I was not expecting, however, for after Beth's recovery and then death, for it to essentially, the next thing that we go into, if I recall correctly, is we see Joe looking out the window and we're into Meg's wedding. The family is getting together to celebrate something that we already know happens, and something that in the 94 version, we go to the funeral and we've got some other things in between. But actually juxtaposing Beth's death with this joyous occasion makes us realize, without anyone having to say it, not only that, yes, Joe, even though she's joyful and she's happy for her sister, but it ties it together with how all of our happiest moments in life are still saturated with grief and loss and things that are unable to happen, you know, which actually for me put me, obviously because we've been watching and doing a lot of these things over lockdown, a lot of moments of joy over the past year have still been tinged with really deep regret over, you know, certain family members not being able to be there, or people we know being sick or having passed. And that's the way things work. And Gerwig has managed to make us feel that simply by putting these events that I know backwards and forwards next to each other that I'd never considered before. So yeah, I do think that placing them in different places gives them a different and, in my opinion, stronger effect, even if the actual events are fairly similar and, taking nothing away from the performances of any of the actors or anything like that.
What about you, Chaz?
I mean, I've already laid my cards on the table that I'd watched. My wife had forced me to watch the 94 version many years ago, and I was kind of unimpressed by it back then. And then I watched the 2019 version, was blown away by it. And then I also listened to the Contrarians podcast, and they did an analysis of the 94 version. And they, said a few things like they preferred Claire Danes as Beth. They preferred Winona Ryder's Jo. They had some interesting observations. So when I came back to the 94 version this time around, I think Winona Ryder's and Claire Danes' performance and the writing of that scene is incredibly powerful. But as I've already talked about, the second half or the last third of that movie feels very and then. You don't feel the interconnectedness of Beth's death to the rest of the family, how it drives Jo's writing. Like, that's a particular thing that's in the 2019 version where Beth at the beach tells Jo, write for me. The scene, rather than just like, boom, I'm going to drop you this emotion grenade on you. It's like, this is all of a piece. And Greta's version is about, the economic trials and search for independence by these women. And it's taking a step back just from Beth's death. All of these interweaving timelines are not just telling these same events to create different emotional experiences for the audience. They certainly are doing that, but they all reinforce the theme that she's exploring.
Building on that, coming back to my reaction to it, I think I was being too kind to the 94 version because the 2019 version, I definitely feel Beth's lost. Like that intercutting of her recovering and her not recovering is so much more like, and I say this as someone who's, middle-aged basically at this point and has experienced loss, and also looking at my parents who hopefully are listening to this episode who have experienced, when you get into your 80s, you experience immense loss over the course of your life, right? And joy, but that then makes the loss harder. And so I think in a way, Little Women is more reflective of kind of an adult's reflection of childhood, whereas Little Women is more a telling of life as it's experienced, but not with the way that memory interplays with it. So I definitely think that Beth's loss is far more effective than the 2019 because of the way that it's like when you cut to her looking glowing long hair and she's smiling and seeing, you're like, you got no idea what the fuck's to come, right?
Yep. But it's about to come in like 3 minutes. And that's why that's why she should have gotten a directorial nod, if not a win, which the fact that she came out in the same year as Parasite is probably the only reason I was.
But was he pregnant while he was directing that film? Because fuck no, she was. She directed an amazing film while fucking pregnant. What a fucking trooper. Oof.
It's 2.25 hours. And it doesn't feel like it, but it's all about that cyclical nature of emotion. And she directs scene to scene, it's about the emotionality. Whether it's the similarities of Beth's recovery and death, or whether it's the differences in terms of, Amy's experience in France and Jo's experience in New York. She's directing a film that is an emotional journey, and it is phenomenally done. But I think Beth's death is a really great example of how it's done. You're going from Beth's death to Meg's wedding to Beth's recovery. It's all of these to Aunt March's death. They all happen. I didn't time it, but probably within about 20 minutes of actual film space. And you're feeling all of these different things, and you're experiencing all these different things. You're seeing these different things. You're seeing them presented similarly and differently in terms of shot choice, but in terms of actual script writing, And that's the real triumph of the 2019 version.
I think what is interesting about, like, you're upset we didn't do this before Social Network, but I think what is interesting between the big difference between Little Women and the Social Network and Destroyer is Destroyer, and to a lesser extent the Social Network, their choice to intercut timelines does make them more intellectual experiences. Because I would say on average, like, to use the 80-20 bullshit statistic rule, most of the time, 80% of the time, the reason that you're doing flashbacks to the past or flash forwards to the future is to create an intellectual experience. Right? There are rare exceptions, like Little Women and Arrival, which we could have actually done in this film. Right?
Yeah.
They've chosen to tell parallel timelines emotionally.
I think sometimes when people, not we, but when people say emotional experience, they mean it as a slightly lesser than or easier than. It's fucking difficult to do that on an emotional level, particularly on a screenplay level, which Greta Gerwig's script does.
And I think Arrival and Little Women are both about loss, right? Yep. And that this really...
I've not read the Arrival script.
I haven't read the script, but having seen the film, and...
I believe it.
I'm going to say it. Having gone to a funeral of a child where they quoted the short story that Arrival was based on, fuck me, that, like, just went right through me. And you sit there and just go, yeah, this is something that is very hard to explain to a child. Like, when you were younger, you're like, you know, so much about getting older is just this sense of loss, the impact that choices have on our present and the way that we cannot escape these choices that we made 17 years ago. But what is interesting about Destroyer, and that's what I'm obviously referencing there, is that I don't think we see the effect on her, but we don't feel it in quite the same way that we do in Little Women and in a way with Arrival. And I think it'd be interesting if you do want to ice skate through those next 3 scenes.
Ice skate.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry.
No, deliberate reference. If you want to ice skate through those things, I think probably the reason they stood out to you is that they've made choices in order to maximize the emotional impact, which is about loss and in the case of Little Women, it's about loss and rebirth, about new possibilities, right? That Amy going to France and meeting Teddy is about them finding new possibilities with each other, right?
The one that I want to talk about in slight contrast, which is really fascinating to me, is the book burning and Amy falling through the ice.
Amy, you've got it.
No, I haven't.
That's a lie.
No, it isn't. I haven't got it. I don't know where it is, and I don't...
Tell me who burnt it up? Mommy! I burnt your book. I told you I'd make you pay, and I did!
In most of the 2019 version, Greta Gerwig is sort of like one event in the present, one event in the past, or we'll visit like the 3 girls, the 3 places where we are: New York, the March family home, and Paris. We'll visit them all, and then we'll go to an event in the past. But she does not separate the book burning because and in retaliation for Amy not being allowed to go to the theater and Amy falling through the ice. She lets all of that play chronologically, and it's one of the longest segments of uninterrupted past timeline, because it's actually 2 events. Most of it, you go back for one event and then you revisit other things. One event, revisit other things, one event. But it's 2 massive events that are next to each other, and it plays out almost exactly like it plays in the 94 version. Amy's upset. Meg and Joe and Laurie and John Brooke go to the theater. Amy burns the book. They come back. They discover it. Joe's super angry. Joe has an outburst at Amy. Then Joe and Teddy go skating. Amy falls through the ice.
Are you all right?
Amy, it's Amy.
Joe, get a branch. Get a branch. Amy! Amy! I can't breathe! Joe, help me pull. Amy, grab the branch! Grab it, Amy!
Joe has a change of heart, comes running and saves her, realizes how much Amy means to her. All of these things that are playing out, I think if it were strictly about making the script clever and strictly about, like, let's stick to the back and forth, that someone might separate those two events, but they're so inextricably intertwined and they're so poignant. And I think that it's struck me that Greta realized you cannot separate those two things. And I thought that exception proving the rule strengthened its impact. And I really am glad that she didn't, because I would have thought that a lot of people would have, as I was watching the movie and it started playing the structure, and I know how these things were. Oh, here's the limes. Oh, now we're here. And I fleetingly wondered if we were going to see both of those incidents broken up, and they weren't. And I...
Wait. Limes or lines?
Yeah, limes. So the reason why Amy gets caned is because she's trading in limes at school.
Limes.
The fruit.
Yes,
They're,
literal limes.
Yeah.
Don't forget this is the Civil War and scurvy was a thing.
But I was about to say that they have no impact on the future, the Good Wives timeline. But I disagree. I'm actually, as I said that, I was like, well, I don't think I disagree. I think they read differently.
Okay, great. Because I was going to vehemently disagree with you.
Because you're reading the relationship between Amy and Teddy.
Which is inextricably linked to both of their relationships with Joe. Yeah. And their relationships with each other.
Yeah, you cannot help but read the 2019, her literally ice skating after. It's less about Joe and more about trying to impress Teddy. That's how you read it. Whereas in the 1994 version, you don't read it like that because, yes, I think she's infatuated with him because she's 12-year-old girls are kind of annoying.
And infatuated with whoever's around.
Yeah,
sure.
Like, if it was Christian Bale.
In terms of parallel timelines and their decision in both adaptations to have those scenes right after another is actually about Joe. Because in both things, it has the same effect, which is Joe as a character realizes that she loves her sisters, even her least favorite sister, more than she loves her dream of her life.
My point about that is that I read the same events that were presented chronologically different between the two versions because of the way that the two versions chose to present an event half the story ago, like 40 minutes ago, changed the way. Yeah. And look, that choice...
The ice falling and the book burning.
Yeah, and also then the I've always played second fiddle to Joe's speech later is all coloured by that.
I agree, but also that's a great speech, but in 2019, the fact that Joe manages to say that Amy has always escaped the real hardships, that's the crux for me. I fucking love that.
When's Amy coming home?
We didn't want to worry her.
Does she not know?
Beth insisted we not tell her because she didn't want to ruin Amy's trip.
Amy has always had a talent for getting out of the hard parts of life.
Joe, don't be angry with your sister.
Mel.
Yes.
I'm going to put you on the spot.
Oh boy.
Do you remember where that sequence sits in the Greta Gerwig version?
You're talking about the book burning and ice skating scenes like together.
And I know you've made the great observation that it's not been separated in the Greta Gerwig version, but I don't know for sure, but I imagine it has been set somewhere after we're seeing Amy and Laurie growing closer together. So they've used that sequence to basically tell the audience, don't feel bad for Joe, that like Joe will forgive Amy for what she's doing. I don't know if that for sure, but I've seen the film twice. And
I'll tell you, in the 1994 version, the book burning comes at 32 minutes. So it's essentially in the first act. In the 2019 version, the book burning, it actually still does come early. And I'm just trying to see if I can find exactly where in my notes. It's actually, if you look at it, interestingly, it's probably still about the same point. If you
45 minutes or so.
Yeah. And it's a much longer film. It's still just about at the same point. Although we have seen, and we know
but I want to know what was the preceding what was the point in the future that throws what is the why has Greta gone, and now we are going to throw from the quote unquote present timeline back into the past into the book burning sequence.
We haven't seen them together. So Jo goes home. She opens the post box and then she goes back to the house and sees Meg and the twins. So we've never seen her with Amy. We've seen that they're separate. So we've seen that Jo's been in New York, that Amy's been in France. We've seen that Jo is going home and that she's starting to have these memories. We have seen Laurie and Amy together after Amy was caned about the limes when she was younger. And we've seen them together older in Paris. So we know that they're still together and they're still friends. But we actually don't know. At that point, we might think, if somebody hasn't, read the books and seen the film, that Jo is upset that Amy is with Laurie and that there's actually been a massive rift between the two of them. And then when we're seeing the book burning, we think, well, that's the starting point. They burned this book and now Amy's probably stolen her boyfriend / best friend. But immediately, Gerwig's like, no, actually, they reconcile. So it is interesting you say that, because I think if you weren't to know and you were to watch it like this, you would think, we've seen them together and we've seen them having, girlish fun when they were young. But now they're living in completely different countries. And now, we're seeing Amy get close to Laurie, and now we're seeing Amy with Laurie in France. Maybe this was the start of this massive rift.
I was just posing the question because of why has she chosen... Yep. We can really clearly see why she's chosen to keep those scenes together, but I'm interested as to why she threw to it.
It's interesting because I guess what she threw to it, because it's such a formative event in Jo's life, and Jo's going home. We see her at the post office. We see her meeting her sisters, and I think it establishes the dynamic that no matter what happens, that they will always sort of return to each other. And it's that idea that no matter what, that emotional core and the fact that they have each other, the four of them will always have each other, it's an emotional through line more than a specific, she threw to this because Jo has an event in her life where she remembers the book being burned.
Jo, don't let the sun go down on your anger. Forgive her. Help each other. And you begin again tomorrow.
I mean, there's so many great differences between the two films. I think in terms of that specific moment, identifying where both adaptations have chosen to actually keep something in relative, not just chronological order, but then also proximity, shows their importance. But Greta Gerwig, again on script notes, but I think it's available on seeing the film, is everything she has chosen to do in terms of ordering structurally the film is to actually make a point around the economic independence of women.
To me, this book is about authorship and ownership, and it's about money, and it's about women and money, and how that intersects with artistic output.
She has said that openly on script notes, that was the purpose of her adaptation. That's what draws her to Louisa May Alcott's novel, that's what her film is about, and that's what the most powerful moments of the 2019 adaptation, both from Amy and Jo's character, and even from Meg's character in terms of her submission to it. I choose this rather than running from it, is that it's all about the economic subjugation of women. And in the way that the 2019 version reorders events, it makes every moment of the film, both the past and the present, be about that message. Whereas the 94 version, I think you could, it seems to, in the final act of the film, lack some kind of coherence, because it's seemingly presenting a whole lot of events that happen to Jo without her being in control of them. So in the 94 version, she's moved to New York. We see her, get in connection with the professor, and then with, falling for the professor and then being called back to Beth dying, Amy returning with Laurie. It doesn't seem to build to anything. And you guys say, Winona Ryder's performance is more carefully coded as straight. I feel it's about that performance in that how that the film seems to point that final third towards, will she win by winning the professor? Whereas the 2019 version goes to utmost lengths to say, we are going to give you the happy ending of her being with the professor, but by saying that is not the win for Jo.
But what is important to say is that she lacks a lot of agency in the third act in the 94 version, right down to the point that her novel, she sends off to the professor, and it is the professor that takes it to the publisher.
Oh, Friedrich, thank you for my book. When I didn't hear from you, I thought you hated it.
Oh, no. Reading your book was like opening a window into your heart. James Fields took it out of my hands, and he would not give it back to me. I said, such news I have to give to her myself.
Right. So she's got almost no agency. The only moment of agency she's got is chasing after the professor on the way to the train. Where in the 2019 version, she is the one that goes and fucking haggles about her novel. Like, there is a whole bunch more agency in the third act. And in fact, there's two specific moments, but I'm sure when we break it down further in the adaptation, we see that she's a lot more in control of her life, right? But I also think, in a broader point, to bring it back to parallel timelines, in the 2019 version, because it opens with her selling the story, I was like, oh, she's going to write Little Women at the end of this, right? And this is going to be the story about how that happens, is a larger framing device, and that is what happens. And I'm not disappointed by that.
It's a poimenon.
Yeah.
All right.
Poimenon?
Can you explain that, Mel?
Yeah, so what is interesting to me about the 2019 version that no other version has really quite done is it is a work of art that is explicitly about its own creation. So it's almost an Ouroboros where it's eating its own tail. It is explicitly about Jo creating the story of Little Women and writing it.
Right. And that's also reflected in the parallel timeline structure, because I think the timeline structure of the present is her beginning to have those moments of reflection that lead her to creating that story, right? Even if she chooses to tell it. So we are a lot more aligned with Jo emotionally with the feelings of, well, regret or just loss of youth.
Regret, nostalgia is a very soft term, but like remembrance. And I find that Beth is a much more active agent in the 2019 version.
Oh, 100%. You must write these stories for me, Jo. Like, I think she's almost got a line where she tells her to keep writing.
On the beach, where she's like, yeah, this is the important story. You've clearly been writing these, but only for yourself, whereas you should get these published. And then that's why Dashwood's daughters connect to it, is because they're connecting to this thing that Jo is writing that they can relate to, which is really great.
Which does bring it back to melodrama, which is the role in domestic, how do you survive this? How do you survive all this shit happening? If you are growing, and I say this is clearly not a woman growing up in Civil War era,
1860s, yeah.
The idea of how do you be a person in a world which deprives you personhood, which is interesting. They're both films tackle that theme, and we'll talk about that a bit more in different ways. But they're both explicitly about that theme. But it's just interesting that structure, the flashback structure, led me to that conclusion, and I'm analyzing the scenes through those lenses. But that idea of, what I really want to interrogate is like, how is what they're doing driven by emotional logic rather than kind of mystery or intellectual logic? But I generally think it is true that most of the people that come to us and go, we want can you do an episode about writing mysteries or parallel timelines, are writing more kind of intellectual, quote unquote, intellectual stories like Destroyer or like The Social Network, rather than doing stuff that is broadly melodramatic like Little Women. So that's why I was interested in doing it first, because that's the story model.
Here's another Christmas gift for the Marsh family.
My Little Women. Oh, you've grown.
What from analyzing these three films from the point of view of doing parallel timelines, have you two learnt from this homework?
I'm still understanding the mechanic of how this happens. And this ties to just what I was saying about Social Network and Destroyer being more intellectual experiences versus Little Women being emotional. And I really like your idea of what is the purpose of this. But I think when I'm watching Destroyer, and to a lesser extent Social Network, but I've seen it so many times it kind of changes it, that I am going, why am I being, it's approaching it as a mystery. Why are the writers showing me this backstory? What am I meant to learn from this? So it naturally makes me lean forward with my head. What is interesting about Little Women is I am not, because the way, and I don't quite know what they're doing yet, and maybe this is what our sidebar will be. What is Greta and her team around her? What are they doing that is differently, that is making me go, actually, I think I'm about to answer my own question. Make me go, why am I flashing back? And I think what I'm about to say is because it's almost all those questions are character questions, but with character questions on a character, but with stakes that are on a character level. Destroyer has character questions, but the stakes are external. And Social Network, the stakes are explicitly external. It's about money. So it's what happens, why is their friendship soured? But it's why is their friendship soured and he's suing him? Why is he suing him for so much money? It's an explicitly external situation. But why has Joe rejected Laurie is internal stakes. So maybe that's what it is that they're making you ask questions, but the stakes are the difference between external stakes and internal stakes.
Well, I think what's different for me is that I was so fucking familiar with A, Little Women as a property, and B, neo-noir as a concept, that I was bringing those expectations to both of those scripts, whereas Social Network sort of stood on its own, right? So one of the reasons that we chose, which really fascinates me, these three scripts, when we were talking this out in a chat, right, but way before we threw a ton of things in, is Social Network is a biopic. It's a real life story that's turned into a script. Destroyer is a totally made up narrative concept. Little Women is an existing property that's existed for 150 years. But
also semi-autobiographical.
Yeah, but I don't think that necessarily fits into how the script was written. It fits into how Greta Gerwig interprets the script, sure, but it doesn't in the 1994 version. You can adapt it without acknowledging that, right?
No, but I think certain choices, like the fact that what I just said about the idea that you use that fancy word for, that you were seeing the creation of a work itself, is explicitly informed by the fact that it's autobiographical. The fact that you have the scene where she goes, actually, we're not going to chase after Frederick.
What does that mean for the ending? Does that mean it exists? Does that mean that it's... Okay, look, here's a teaser for the sidebar. I'm going to argue that Greta Gerwig out Christopher Nolan with the whole... Oh my God, it's fucking brilliant. I don't think anyone in the last 20 years has managed to do what Greta Gerwig does in this adaptation.
So, who does she marry?
No one. She doesn't marry either of them.
No, that won't work at all.
Well, she says the whole book that she doesn't want to marry.
Who cares? Girls want to see women married, not consistent.
No, it isn't the right ending.
The right ending is the one that sells. Trust me, if you decide to end your delightful book with your heroine a spinster, no one will buy it. It won't be worth printing.
I suppose marriage has always been an economic proposition, even in fiction.
It's romance.
It's mercenary.
Just end it that way, will you?
Fine.
It's mind-blowing. And the more I think about it, the more mind-blowing it gets. But we chose...
She literally had her cake and
ate it and still felt great afterwards. When I just ate an entire cake and feel amazing.
She just created Schrödinger's cake. But that's explicitly informed by the fact that it's semi-autobiographical. And the parallel timeline structure enables that to happen. If that ending happened in the 94, you would have been like, what the fuck is that? right? But because we've already explicitly set up that there's a contrivance in the narrative.
But you could interpret some of Flannery O'Connor's work that is not semi-autobiographical, and you could make adaptations that do a parallel timeline thing, right? Like, Little Women works, but you could do it off of something that's not semi-autobiographical.
Of course. I'm just saying that understanding possibly informed her approach to the story.
Oh, 100%.
There's an inherent meta quality to the text, which I was alluding to before, which is that you're holding a book, so someone wrote it. And then so you have like Louisa May Alcott writing Jo, and Louisa May Alcott is writing something that looks vaguely like her life, and Jo is kind of an avatar. And then Jo is also writing something that vaguely looks like her life. And then it's me writing Louisa writing Jo. And it felt like the only way to represent all of this is to get quite cubist about it.
Sure. And there's no way for me to disconnect. So I'm hardly an unbiased observer. But when we chose these three scripts, we chose them because they were very different. And they approached parallel timelines in three very different ways. All three of them successfully. As much as I might take issue with the end result of The Social Network, or as much as Chaz might say that the final couple of scenes of The Destroyer didn't work. In the end, these are three very successful scripts who take different approaches to timelines that are completely out of joint, if you were. And I love that from a script perspective. And I like that we can examine three fairly different approaches. One that mostly intercuts by using exposition, which The Social Network does. One that intercuts in terms of like character, which The Destroyer really does. You know, cutting back and forth between her and it's a plot twist, quote unquote. And one that Little Women, it says, look, it's a foregone conclusion. You all know what happens. You've all seen the 8 different adaptations, whether it's the anime or the Katharine Hepburn or the whatever. You know what happens. Let's talk about it from an emotional standpoint. And they all figure out different ways to structure their scripts.
My gut reaction, my impression, and they might not adhere to this rule completely, but I would say most of the time, Little Women, we flash back from the present to the past based on Jo's reminiscing of the past.
Occasionally Amy's, which is fascinating to me.
But the first one is her dancing, and then that leads into the twirling of the hair in Beth's hair.
And then Meg's dance.
Yes. So it goes from them prepping to go to the dance together. So it's Jo reminiscing, and that leads to this idea that it's about the creation of the story because it's her living her present day life and the moments that make her reflect back on the past. They possibly break that, but we are embedded that into the structure that we probably ignore those moments where it doesn't quite gel motivationally. And that is very... Destroyer has similar echoes, but it's like her sitting down and just going, I'm doing the Nicole Kidman face where you can imagine it just doing a slow dolly into me reminiscing about my past kissing Sebastian Stan, which, well, fuck, I'm there, right?
We're all there. Mostly straight dude, mostly queer women. We're all there. Let's kiss Sebastian Stan.
He can die in a bank for me anytime. All right, speaking of mostly queer, straight men, people, Chaz.
Okay. So I'm going to try and phrase this more for the benefit of our listeners. I think that if you're choosing to interweave timelines of existing characters, past and present, you are going to inherently make a compromise between plot suspense and character exposition. You are inherently going to reveal some plot determinations ahead of time and make the questions become more character questions. I think that's just built into it.
Holy shit, we should cut that and put that at the beginning of the episode so the audience will colour. That's the thesis, and it's the opening, and then they'll colour all their other readings of it, and then it's really meta.
Awesome. I think, however, where we've seen it gone, we've looked at 3 examples of it going right and a couple of tangents about it going wrong. I think the really important thing is that when you know the plot outcome of something, there are still stakes in the quote-unquote past outcome.
Or the flash forward. So whichever is your B storyline.
Yes. You want to know either why or how something happens. Even though you know the outcome of it, you still have unresolved questions. So you need to have stakes even in whether they're character stakes, you need to have stakes. You can't have the parallel timelines undermining the stakes. And also, so the two final notes I've taken, and I've written these notes while we've been recording this podcast, but one is, how do you start the film and how much time do you spend in the initial timeline, I think is really important. And then what you're doing in the trade-off with parallel timelines is consequences versus choice, right? You've already told the audience what the choices the characters are going to make, or you've told them the consequences. You haven't told them the why or the how.
A, yes. B, interesting to contrast with The Irishman, which you said, which I agree with. C, we've all got these scripts, right? Where I've got a script, which is a pilot that I've been working on for a long time, and multiple producers have told me, put the end of your 44-minute pilot at the beginning and then build up to it.
This too is special. Yeah.
Yeah. And make the audience figure out why. And I say, I don't want to do that for 18 different reasons. But that is it's a knee-jerk reaction. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But the reason that everyone now wants to do it is because we've seen that it can really work. It can really make the audience go, why did we get to this seemingly absurd... and this is the concept of a lot of Better Call Saul episodes, a lot of Breaking Bad episodes, not seasons. There's the plane crash season, we'll put that aside. And Vince Gilligan is a genius, and we'll put that aside. But yeah, you go, wait, how the fuck did you get to point Z? Now the episode starts at point A, and we try to figure out how the characters get there. I will argue it works better mostly, 95% of the time, in television than it does in film, because television is grounded in character arcs and all of these things where we might already know the characters inside and out, and we'd say, they would never do that. And the episode now has to convince us that there's a set of circumstances that would get them to do that.
Yeah.
Which is the point of Better Call Saul.
Better Saul has the best Stewart special of all time.
100%.
Which is like 5 seasons of another show.
Fucking Better Call Saul is also like Little Women. They announced it. I said, this is bullshit. This will not work. And then I watched it and went, this is the most brilliant thing of all time. I was wrong.
It's better than Breaking Bad. Because it's got more...
Agreed.
Because the structure of itself gives it more character complexity.
And the dramatic irony is mind-blowing.
And in fact, when it starts becoming plotty... And look, I love this show. And then now we definitely, like, Jazz is like, I've got to fucking get up and pack you, motherfucker. You can go to bed and we'll just record for 2 more hours until we pass out. But when it becomes plotty, when it's about the kind of drug dealing stuff, which is, it's about the machinations of, it becomes less interesting because the Saul stuff is character. It's about internal. And that's a very hard thing to quite articulate. Like, we know, like, I kind of instinctively know what it is, but there's the machinations of how does this particular drug dealer end up over here? Or, like, how do they end up dead? Or whatever he is at the end of season, whatever the last season was. But when it's, like, about the corruption of Saul, it's a lot more interesting. All right. But I think Chaz did a great summary. Thanks, Jack Smith, for suggesting this topic. Obviously, there was a lot of food for thought.
But I have nothing to give you. My hands are empty.
Not empty now.
As always, this episode of Draft Zero was brought to you by our amazing patrons. If you want more Draft Zero more often, please do check out our Patreon page in the show notes. But extra special thanks to our top tier patrons, Bjorn, Garrett, Jesse, Krob, and Sandra. I don't see what you guys see in us, but thank you. I hope you all feel like arguing with either Stu or myself
about anything on this episode or anything in general.
And you can find many ways of getting in touch with us at our website at draft-zero.com.
At the website, you'll also find the show notes for this and all our other episodes,
as well as links to support us and spread the word for free via a rating and review on Apple Podcasts.
Very important for spreading the word.
Or if you think that what we do here is worth $1 or preferably more than $1, then you can also find links to our Patreon page to support us getting these episodes to you quicker. Thanks.
And thanks for listening.
And now for Backmatter. All right, we have a couple of pieces of Backmatter for this final part on Interweaving Timelines. This is just Chaz for one moment, dropping in to give some listener feedback from Lauren Simpson, who wrote in about part 2 of Interweaving Timelines, The Social Network. And here it goes. Okay, I know I'm a month late on this. I just listened to the Social Network episode and wanted to add that in 2010, we already knew he was rich beyond reason. The kind of guy who wore hoodies to business meetings and someone who had enemies. Essentially, an asshole. We watched the movie to confirm or disconfirm that belief, but the question the movie is in fact asking is not, is Zuck an asshole or is he just misunderstood? The movie answers that at the top. He's an asshole. The question the movie is asking is the asshole redeemable? The movie offers the audience all the color of how and why and when Zuck sinned and breadcrumbs you towards the final reveal of whether or not he can be redeemed via the flash forwards. That's what the dual timelines do. They create the tension in the lead up to the reveal in the vein of surely Zuck must have learned and grown since his college days of misogyny and IP theft, and yet he has not grown. He has become older, more detached, more powerfully cutthroat. Rashida Jones was wrong. If you tried hard to be an asshole, guess what? You're an asshole. Love your podcast. This episode was great. Thank you for doing what you do. And thank you, Lauren. I'm not entirely sure I agree with your take, but as you heard during the Social Network episode, it's really hard to divorce our take on that film without the realities of what Facebook has become since then. And look, as much as Stu and I love the film, please be under no delusions that we don't both feel that Facebook is undermining democracy around the world. Anyway, now on to the second part of Backmatter, which is some really cool moments from the Little Women podcast that you've just listened to, that we cut for pacing reasons, but kind of the interesting effects that casting and the adaptations have had.
And look, I also think there's a slight restaging of the beat after Amy's had her hand caned because of the limes, which is in the 94 version, which I'm guessing is closer to the book, that she goes home with her caned hand, whereas in the Greta Gerwig 2019 version, she goes and presents herself outside of Theo's house. She wants his attention. So in the 2019 version, her getting caned becomes a way for him to get... well, why else do it? Why else divert? Because we've talked about earlier about how, like, the difference between infatuation or whatever, but I definitely think in the 2019 version, because they're going to make it about their romance, that you need to see more beats of her trying to build connection with him, and her turning up with a hand, be sympathy, take care of me, is all about that. And then the scene after, the next big event from memory is then Joe going with Theo to the play, which makes Amy jealous. And I interpret that as, in the 2019 version, it's not that she's jealous that Joe is getting to go to a play, but that she's getting to go with Theo. Therefore, she acts out and burns the book. And therefore, it's a little bit more connected to that through line, because I think the larger structural decision in terms of Amy's journey is her romance with Theo, to the point where the approximate midpoint is the discussion of her. Yes, it's a thematic point, which is Amy talking about the importance of marriage from an economic point of view. But it's that moment you're also like, I think he's realizing that he kind of loves her, or he's at least has the hots for her, which is something that we never get in the 1994 version. Because they've had to work very hard in that to make their own, to me, the 2019 is effective in many ways, but one is their romance. Makes his romancing of, Amy's romancing of him makes much more sense.
Well, they regardless of whether you read it as that was Amy's intention, like she was trying to get Teddy's, the restaging primes the audience to accept their romance far more than in the 94 version.
It's also helped by the fact that it's played by the same actor as opposed to in the former having a very young Kristen Dunst would have been a far weirder trying to
Kirsten
restage
Dunst
that
was
as a
probably-
romantic.
But she's
angle.
probably you couldn't do that specific scene.
Right, not that
Maybe
scene
not,
with
12.
the limes. No, not
Yeah,
with Christian
maybe like
Bale. He was no. That nope, absolutely.
I mean, just to give you that juxtaposition, the I will kiss you scene in the 94 version feels creepy as fuck, but does not in the 2019 version. And that's probably just the age of Florence Pugh.
But weirdly, because Florence Pugh is not 12, as Beth is meant to be, as Amy is meant to be in the book, right? So they've cast older to make the fact that some of these social, it's like Emma tends to get
12 and
cast
16.
older.
12 and 16 is hardly lots of. Anyway, we're definitely getting
Prepubescent and postpubescent.
Yeah, but like her being.
but it's all one directional, and I'm not saying that.
Yeah, and they've changed that in it, and I don't know if it necessarily it makes the romance more acceptable, but it makes fucking Florence Pugh's version. I know people are like, oh, she's amazing. It still comes across as she's got Arrested Development in the 2019 version. That I'm like, she is not 12. She looks like a 16-year-old who's basically had her development arrested by her family that always teach her about the youngest, which is slightly different from the fact that maybe she's just an annoying 12-year-old because 12-year-olds are annoying.
I'm also interested how
wait until Saleh is 12 years old, Chaz. You're in a world of fucking fun.
I'm a little bit curious how much because I'd seen Florence Pugh in several things before Little Women, but I don't think most non-Australian, like I'd seen Lady Macbeth and what else? But the Little Women was her American, if I'm not mistaken. Both she and Claire Scania was really their American sort of debut. And so it would be interesting to know how much of that
Did it come out before Midsummer?
I believe so.
I think they're around about
maybe
the same
that's just
time.
because I saw it before Midsummer. Anyway, all right, we're getting way off topic. That's all I have to. We can cut most of this postulation out.
I think that will sit nicely in the.
Oh, I just mean about the acting and Kirsten Dunst. And stuff.
Oh no, I mean that's almost like Backmatter stuff. That's the stray observations about Little Women versus Little Women, because I think that is. And this could be actually better. I think that's a really interesting, it's a challenge, right? Doing a period piece when you have had social mores shift around eligibility, right? Like you look back and you're like, oh, fucking, how did anyone think Manhattan was a good idea? Like Woody Allen's 42 dating a 17-year-old. Why is his friends not like, you are a creepy motherfucker?
Jerry Seinfeld
right?
did it in real life, so you know.
Exactly. But now the conversation shifted where there's a lot more to the point where my parents have a 9-year age difference. You know, my dad was 30, my mum was 21. And if someone was posted on Reddit saying, I'm a 20-year-old, 21F dating a 30-year-old M, what do you think? People would be like, red flag, right? Because the social mores have shifted. You know, and I think that's just the challenge of that. But the difficulty, of course, in the 94 version is that what that means is that when they jump to future Amy, I have no engagement. I have to kind of work to reconnect with her as a character because she's acted by a different person. So I had this moment of like, I think if I hadn't necessarily seen the 94, if I hadn't seen the 2019 version, there would have been a moment in terms of parallel timeline or whatever it is, interweaving timelines, not that they're interwoven, but that hierarchy of knowledge. I'll be like, who the fuck is this person? That's Amy? Whoa, wow, that was some puberty, right?
I think they fade across the timeline.
They do a really
from her to Amy,
her dancing around the pole, and they have all the leaves and the seasons change. The camera spins, and then it ends on her, and then someone like says her name within the scene. Yeah, they do.
That's absolutely. They have to freaking highlight it. They have to work really hard, but it makes it intellectual. Whereas I think Pugh does a great job in terms of the way she carries herself, etc. It's hard. Like, I wish they just cut her hair. You know, something like that. Like something that
I thought the hair was like the childish braids and the plait. Like I thought that, I don't know. I thought it was fairly clear.
I don't know. I just don't think, I guess the point is she doesn't come across as 12. I'll just come back to that. She doesn't come as 12 in the Greta Gerwig version.
I don't think she does either, but I was okay with Arrested Development, like snotty 15, 16
I'm not
year
actually
old
even sure she is 12. Like, I don't think they ever state her age. She could have just aged her up a bit. You know what I mean? I think you're saying 12
I'm going
when
12
she
off
rewrites
the...
it, yeah, in the book, sure. But I think, you know, when you rewrite it, you go, okay, she's 15.
But there is a difference between 12-year-old teenagers and a 15-year-old teenager in terms of maturity, etc.
But that doesn't mean the 12-year-old's not crushing on the 15-year-old.
Oh, absolutely not. I just think it changes character motivation and character behavior. That's all.
Yep.
And it's a difficult thing that they've had to work very hard to make Beth less annoying because she's super annoying in the 94 version, but it kind of works. And I completely get... Amy, sorry. Yeah.
Don't
I have to work really hard.
Beth. How dare you?
Beth.
Amy is like, they have to work really hard to make Amy... you get why she's infatuated with him, and it definitely makes it feel that Theo's marriage towards her is opportunistic, right? That he's trying to marry her into the family. She likes him. She's hot now. Why not, right? Like, it definitely feels like okay. Whereas in the Greta Gerwig version, you're like, yeah, they're actually pretty compatible. You know, they'll be a good enough match. You know, 90% or whatever. Whereas in the older version, it definitely feels like a marriage of convenience. Anyway, that's my largest we've done enough talk comparing the two films. Like, we've already done a bit of a Little Women versus Little Women. So, which is really interesting. It's just that the rest of it feels like it comes down to like locations and budget. Like, it feels like the 94 version couldn't necessarily shoot as in a larger variety of locations. They probably had like a tenth of the money.
They're missing that beach in a big way. But
yeah.
All right. What's our outro?
Surprise!
Their destiny
You have a daughter. And a son.
was wherever their hearts would take them. Winona Ryder, Trini Alvarado, Samantha Mathis, Kirsten Dunst, Claire Danes, and Susan Sarandon. The story that has lived in our hearts for generations comes to the screen for the holidays.
I should have Samantha.